Romanticism is one of the most important historical events of all time. Unlike things typically considered by history, Romanticism is not a war, nor a technology or political event. It refers to the birth of new ideas, a new worldview, and the way in which a person feels. Romanticism began in Western Europe in the mid-18th century as part of the work of artists, poets, and philosophers. It later spread around the world, changing how people viewed nature, children, love, sex, money, and work. Today, we are all, to some extent, romantics in our sensitivity. Romanticism is best understood as a reaction to the birth of the modern world and some of its key features: industrialization, urbanization, secularization, and consumerism. Below are some of the key moments in the history of Romanticism. Lausanne, Paris, May 1762. Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau publishes a book about raising children, Emile, or On Education. The work argues against the oppressive world of adults and praises the natural goodness, spontaneity, and wisdom of small children. At times, the book even desperately urges mothers to breastfeed their children. This is one of the earliest preserved proofs of this practice in Western civilizations. The world around Rousseau was increasingly becoming more rational, scientific, and technological. It was becoming more reasonable, planned, sterile, and bureaucratic. As an opponent of all this, Rousseau positions a child as the original rebel, a representative of everything pure, untrained, and outside the discipline of adults. The child is the foundation of creativity and genius. For the first time in Western history, not the seriousness and self-control of adults, but freedom from tradition, the natural, the innocence, and sweetness of the child are presented as something to aspire to. Brook Street, London, August 1770. 17-year-old poet Thomas Chatterton swallows a significant amount of arsenic and ends his life in his small apartment. He takes his life because no one wants to publish his poetry, which is filled with beauty and wisdom. Another reason is that his family, not understanding his passion, pressures him to become a lawyer. Soon, a cult forms around a young, beautiful poet with long, shoulder-length brown hair. He becomes an emblem of something that will become very important for the Romantics: the idea of the sensitive, fated-to-suffer artist, rejected by a harsh, vulgar world. Chatterton becomes the first among a series of romantic heroes, from Byron to Keats to Van Gogh, and even in modern times, Jim Morrison and Amy Winehouse. Romanticism also adopts many ideas from Christianity. The romantic hero is identified with the figure of Christ, the lost one, who is truly noble in the eyes of those few who understand. Leipzig, Germany, 1774. German author Goethe publishes a typical romantic love story, The Sorrows of Young Werther. It tells the story of a passionate but doomed love affair between a young poet named Werther and a beautiful, intelligent young woman named Charlotte. Unfortunately for Werther, Charlotte is married, so their love is doomed from the beginning. But this does not stop Werther, the dreamer and practical young man, who loves art more than anything else. Like Chatterton, Werther is also under pressure to have a sensible job and join the bourgeoisie, but he can only think of one thing: the impulse of his heart. In the end, Werther cannot bear the impossibility of his fate and takes his own life. However, instead of being declared a lunatic and madman, Goethe, one of the founders of Romanticism, directs all our sympathies toward Werther. We are expected to be on his side, admiring his passion and completely impractical attitude toward love. The book becomes the most popular book of a whole generation. 3 million copies are printed. Napoleon declares it the greatest work of European literature. It dramatically changes how many people view love, placing dramatic outpourings of love above more traditional and rational concerns about class, lineage, and money. For a romantic, it is always right and worthy to follow your heart. The disastrous consequences are simply proof of how cold and heartless the so-called world of adults can be. Madrid, Spain, 1798. Artist Francisco Goya creates one of his most iconic paintings. The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. The painting captures a typical romantic interest in the limits of reason and the power of the irrational over the fragile human mind. To be a romantic means to sympathize with madness and to be vindictive toward pompous claims like the triumph of the rational, scientific, and logical. Young English poet William Wordsworth moves with his sister Dorothy to a place that becomes one of the most famous residences in English history, Dove Cottage, Grasmere, at the edge of the Lake District. Here, they will spend the next 9 years, and Wordsworth will write some of the greatest poetry ever written in English, celebrating something that is often lost in focus: nature. He will write about daffodils, oaks, clouds, butterflies, and rivers, and his work will enchant and captivate Europe. Within a generation, by Wordsworth's own account, the Lake District will have more tourists than sheep. However, most importantly, in Wordsworth's poetry, one can find hatred for everything mechanical and industrial. When, many years later, a railway line threatens to be built through the Lake District, Wordsworth and his followers do everything in their power to reroute the train, a symbol of Wordsworth's hatred of technology. To be a romantic means to stand on the side of nature against industry. It means to prefer a daffodil over a viaduct, a tree over a factory. At the time, as large swaths of Britain are covered with often monstrous new cities making Europe rich, Wordsworth, the typical romantic, stands on the side of a natural and simple life. American artist Thomas Cole paints one of his most recognized paintings, the mighty Niagara Falls, with a few Native Americans in the foreground. Cole establishes himself as a painter of majestic scenes and vast landscapes found in America, showing pride in nature at its most impressive. A person seems small and weak when compared to it. This is a very common romantic worldview, as romantics do not believe in God, but they spend their lives searching for emotions that might have been found in religions when they were still a major part of human existence, and they place them in vast natural spaces. To be a romantic means to find relief from the pressures of the chaotic city in the magnificence of nature, which surpasses everything created by humans and removes all worries. 14 years after certain incompetent officials destroy the British Parliament through fire, a new building opens its doors, designed by the rising star of architecture, Augustus Pugin. Remarkably, although the building is new, it is designed to look old. In fact, it looks very old, almost medieval. It is filled with knight armor and sculptures of seated angels. When architect Pugin defends the design of the building, he argues that it is worthy because it reminds people of the pre-industrial past of their country before it became obsessed with money or technology. A cult arises in the Middle Ages, a major theme that romantics associate with the world of knights and castles, virtues that, in their view, are absent in factories and shopping centers of the modern world.